Bibliophiles of the internet, today I'm here to celebrate some of my favorite love stories. If you're seeing this on the day it's uploaded, today is actually Valentine's Day, and at first I thought I would showcase my favorite romance books, which is still a video I might make in the future, but then I thought about how, especially as someone who is both aro and ace, I constantly wish that people would celebrate and recognize love of all kinds. So I thought about 5 different forms of love: platonic, familial, community-oriented, romantic, and self-love, and I chose a handful of books that I think fit into each of those categories. Of course, I could mention so many more than just the 3 or 4 books I picked out for each category, but I'm trying to keep this video both informational and fairly concise. So with all of that said, let's get into it. The first category, like I said, is platonic love, and I thought I would start out with Dear Wendy by Anne Zhao. This is a contemporary upper YA story set in college. It's about Sophie and Joe, 2 Aro A students who both run anonymous advice accounts on social media, fielding questions and concerns from their peers. Sophie's account is a little more buttoned up, and Joe's is a bit more comedic and unserious, and because of their very different takes, they end up feuding online quite a bit. But offline, the two of them unknowingly get paired up on a project and become fast friends in real life. Personally, I would not consider this to be one of my favorite books, but at the same time, I can really respect how important it is to have these depictions of aro-ace identity where platonic love is centered and given the same kind of shine and depth as romantic love. That feeling you get when you find someone who's your person, someone you're deeply connected with and find a sense of safety within is a really beautiful thing, and I think it is special to see Joe and Sophie truly fall in love with each other as friends. Next, I have to talk about It Sounds Like This by Ana Meriano. This is one of my favorites. It's another queer YA contemporary story about a young Latina musician named Yasmin who really wants to make a good impression as a freshman in her first year of marching band. But she gets off on the wrong foot when she reports an anonymous gossip account that is harassing new band members and accidentally gets the entire low brass section suspended as a result. So she decides that she's going to switch from flute to sousaphone in order to make things right. This book is super underrated, but I love it so much. It has a really sweet budding relationship between Yasmin, who is aro-ace questioning, and a boy named Bloom, who is demisexual and demi-romantic. Besides that, though, there's also a really fantastic friend group at the center of the story, especially because Yasmin finds herself in this new section full of boys, and as they learn how to work together and try to salvage the marching season, they all become really close. I love that Yasmin is both learning about how she processes physical and emotional intimacy, but also finds validation because she does find a fulfilling kind of love with her new friends, who show up for her in really surprising and endearing ways. Lastly, for this category, I thought of A Song of Salvation by Alicia Dow. This is technically the 3rd companion book to the universe that began with The Sound of Stars, but it can also be read as a standalone. It's a YA space opera about a reincarnated god named Zyra who must escape her home so she can find the boy prophesied to help her defeat the god of destruction. Wesley is that very same boy. He's working as a smuggler so he can one day have enough money to explore the stars, and he's taken on one last job that should set him up for life. But when his path crosses with Zyra, he finds himself in the middle of an intergalactic war. If you're not reading Alicia Dow, I'm not quite sure what you're doing with your life, especially with this companion series. She writes these very richly imagined intergalactic adventures that span from planet Earth to deep space. Her characters are always endearing and interesting to follow. She explores intimacy in really thoughtful ways, especially because most, if not all, of her characters are usually somewhere on the ace spectrum. And while there is a romantic subplot between 2 of the 3 main characters in this book, it's also just a really exciting sci-fi adventure that centers this really cool little found family. Next, we're moving on to familial love, starting with The Magic Fish by Trung Le Nguyen. This is a really beautiful graphic novel about a young queer Vietnamese boy named Tien who wants to come out to his parents, but his parents only speak Vietnamese and he doesn't quite know how to translate his experience. Something he and his parents love to do is read stories together from books that they borrow from the library, and through their shared love of fairy tales, Tien hopes to find a way to share his truth with the people he loves the most. Like I said, this is a really beautiful and stunning story. The artwork alone is so spectacular and emotive. It's a truly special story about the universality and connective power of story itself. And it's just a really heartfelt look at a family learning how to love each other better in more ways than one. On a very different note, when it comes to familial love, I would also recommend The Cost of Knowing by Brittany Morris. This is a blend of contemporary and speculative fiction about a Black teenager named Alex who has the power to glimpse into the future when he touches people or objects. Being able to see into the future brings him a lot of anxiety and stress, distracting him from his ability to be present in his own life, which only becomes even more heightened when he accidentally has a vision that shows his younger brother's imminent death. Yes, this is a much heavier story by necessity, but I think it has so much to offer. It's such a powerful allegory for how young Black boys specifically bear the weight of knowing the systemic pain and injustice that awaits them in this world. But that's kind of the crux of the story, how Alex can either succumb to the despair of knowing that his brother won't survive, or he can try to find and create moments of joy for them to experience together before they no longer have those moments. It's a really beautiful and heart-wrenching depiction of brotherhood and love in the face of loss. If you have not read it, I highly recommend it. And lastly for this category is a fairly recent read of mine, that is Bad Cree by Jessica Johns. This is an indigenous horror story about a young Cree woman named Mackenzie who finds herself with the ability to walk through her own dreams, and she can also bring things back from the dream world into the waking world. Night after night, her dreams force her to return to a memory from just before her sister's untimely death. Not only that, but she starts receiving strange text messages from someone claiming to be her dead sister, and it's at that point when Mackenzie knows that she'll have to return home and enlist her friends and family to help her fight back against this evil force. I talked about this more in depth in my November wrap-up, but what I really love about this story is that it subverts so many tropes and dynamics that you would expect from this kind of horror story. Horror is a genre that thrives on isolation as a primary source of fear, and yet Mackenzie is very open with her people about what she's experiencing, and she's not afraid to turn to her family for help when she needs it the most. That subversion is really powerful, and it's just refreshing to see this family face down their demons together and acknowledge that trying to shield each other from their grief is part of what created this cycle of pain in the first place. Now we're going to talk about community love, starting with Lucky Red by Claudia Cravens. This is a really cool queer western. It's set in 1877 and following a teenager named Bridget who suddenly finds herself orphaned when she and her father try to cross the Kansas prairie and he is bitten by a snake. She finishes the journey on her own and arrives in Dodge City without a single penny to her name, but her bright red hair ends up being her saving grace because she is recruited to work at a local brothel run entirely by women. Everything changes when Spartan Lee, a legendary female gunslinger, rides into town, and Bridget finds herself falling hard and fast. I love this book so much. It has all the trappings of an epic, slow-boiling western full of action, drama, and suspense, but it's also an exploration of the difference between surviving and actually living your life. I put it in this category because one of the strongest elements of the story is Bridget's found family that she discovers while working at the brothel. She is surrounded by strong, complex women from so many different backgrounds and walks of life, and if they had not taken her under their wing, she would not have a second chance at life. Next, of course, I have to show some more love for the Luis Ortega Survival Club by Sonora Reyes. This is a YA contemporary story that's kind of a queer, BIPOC, neurodivergent spin on John Tucker Must Die. It's about Ariana, a Latina autistic teenager who is largely nonverbal, and because of that, she's mostly ignored by her peers and has very few friends. That's why it's such a big deal when Luis, one of the most popular boys in school, takes a liking to her and isn't afraid to be seen with her in public. But things quickly escalate, and when Ari decides to go to a party with Luis, he forces himself on her and they end up having sex without her consent. In the aftermath, as rumors are going around the school, Ari finds a note in her locker that eventually leads her to a group of students determined to finally expose Luis for the predator he truly is. This definitely deals with heavier topics, especially if the trauma surrounding sexual assault and rape, which are off-page, is something triggering for you. Please just skip this one. But I do think it is ultimately a refreshing spin on a high school revenge story that offers a lot in the way of hope and healing. This book is in this category because it's such a beautiful love letter to the discovery of community and found family. The story really understands how powerful it is to connect with people who not only share your experiences, but more importantly, share your desire and dream of growing, healing, and getting to a better place. The last book or books that I think fit into this category are the Zoe Washington books by Janae Marks. This is a really sweet and also empowering middle grade series about a young Black girl named Zoe who has never met her father because he's been in prison for her entire life. But just before her 12th birthday, she receives a letter from him. They begin writing back and forth, learning about one another, and Zoe also learns that he may have been convicted for a crime that he did not actually commit. She is determined to uncover the truth, so she begins her own investigation into what really happened, even if it means having to hide the letters and her own suspicions from the rest of her family. This is such a great series for young readers. I think if you like the Front Desk series, you would also like this. While the first book is more focused on Zoe's family, the second book is is really a testimony to the power of community and how we have to actively make change if we want to see change. Zoe is an incredibly strong, driven, curious character who wants to help as many people as possible and do right by as many people as she can. And it's just really great to see her activism and her involvement in the community really come to life. Next, we're going to talk about romantic love, which was in some ways both the easiest and hardest category to narrow down, but we're going to talk about Her Good Side by Rebecca Weatherspoon to start. This is such an adorable and fun YA romance that more people need to be reading and talking about. It's about a teenager named Bethany who's very confident and self-assured, but she's also somewhat of a late bloomer who's never dated or kissed anyone, and she actually just got rejected for a homecoming date because of her inexperience. Enter Jacob, who had somewhat of a summer glow-up and then promptly got himself dumped twice in 2 months because he had no idea what he was doing as a boyfriend. So he and Bethany decide to take each other to homecoming as a practice date, even though the more they spend time together and get to know each other, the less it seems like practice. Like I said, this is a super swoony, feel-good, upbeat romance that has so many things going for it. The relationship between Bethany and Jacob is really sweet. They create this safe space with and for each other and give each other room to grow in how they're understanding and expressing romantic feelings, which is huge. I truly cannot emphasize enough how cute this story is. Next, I'm going to do a little throwback and take us back to 2018 with Let's Talk About Love by Claire Kahn. This came out over 7 years ago, and I still think about it so much. It's a romance starring a Black biromantic asexual librarian named Alice who was unfortunately dumped by her ex when she came out as Ace. But then she meets her new coworker, Takumi, who may in fact be the softest, purest cinnamon roll in existence, and suddenly she has to wonder whether it might be worth it to put herself back out there again, and also whether Takumi will still be interested when she tells him that she's Ace. I think this book was so foundational for me because it's just a beautiful depiction of a soft, lovely, tender romance. And I also appreciate how the story shows a main character who finds joy, fulfillment, and purpose from so many different non-romantic, non-sexual pillars in her life. And related to that, it's just such a beautiful thing to see these two characters discovering and establishing a very deep sense of intimacy that's never positioned as lesser just because it doesn't include sex. And the last romance book I'll recommend is one of my favorites from last year, so I had to include it. That is The 7-Year Slip by Ashley Poston. This is a truly special romance with just a touch of magic or surrealism. If you love the movie The Lake House, as I do, then you will absolutely love this. It's about a woman named Clementine whose beloved aunt recently passed away, and in doing so, she actually left Clementine her apartment. One day, she comes home to find a strange man standing in her late aunt's kitchen, only to eventually discover that even though they can interact in the apartment, he is actually living 7 years in the past. I cannot tell you how much I love this story. It's exuberant, it's heartfelt, that little bit of magic elevates what could be a straightforward romance into something so much more resonant. And that 7-year gap between the characters actually challenges them to figure out how to love one another not for who they were or who they might yet become, but as who they are exactly in this present moment, which is such a gift. One of my biggest takeaways from this story is how life can still very much be beautiful even when it's complicated, and I think that message really wonderfully ties in with the overall romance. My last category is self-love, and I'm going to start with perhaps an unorthodox recommendation, which is To Shape a Dragon's Breath by Monoquill Blackgoose. This is a blend of alternate history and fantasy, following a young indigenous woman named Anakus, who is the first person on her island to find and bond with a dragon hatchling in many, many generations. This relationship is actually revered as sacred among her people, but because there hasn't been an Ampishaweasid among them for so long, the sacred ways of training and keeping a dragon have been all but entirely lost. And also the English conquerors have heard about this dragon hatchling and come to tell Anakus that she is required to join an English dragon academy in order to learn the quote-unquote proper way to train her dragon hatchling. And if she is not able to master those skills, then her dragon will be put to death. What does any of this have to do with self-love, I hear you asking? Well, Anakus is a force to be reckoned with. She knows exactly who she is, exactly what she stands for, exactly what she believes in, and she will not compromise that for anyone or anything. She is such a strong character who has an incredibly deep respect both for her culture and also for herself. And if that's not self-love, I don't know what is. This category also brought to mind Beating Heart Baby by Leo Min. This does have some romantic overtones to it, but I would say it's much more of a coming-of-age story. It's about Santi, a mixed-race Filipino teenager who's been raised by his late mom's best friend and has somewhat of a checkered past. Because he ends up having to repeat a grade, his guardian decides to move them to Los Angeles so that Santi can have a fresh start. At his new school, he joins the marching band and almost immediately clashes with this stuck-up trans trumpet player named Suwa, who has no problem telling Santi that he is not good enough to be there. But of course, they get to know each other better, and as they grow closer, their budding relationship begins to compete with Suwa's ambitions to become a breakout indie rock artist. It's honestly hard for me to name another story that has struck the very core of my essence in quite the same way as Beating Heart Baby did. It's electric, it's earnest, and it's a beautiful love letter to these two queer boys who are constantly struggling to find some semblance of love, safety, stability, and authenticity to truly call their own. The story is about their journey both away from and towards each other in so many ways, but more importantly, it's about their journey towards learning how to show love and care not only to the people around them, but also to themselves. I would also categorize Beauty and the Besharam by Lily Vale as being centered around self-love. This is a YA rom-com about 17-year-old Kavya, who is an ambitious overachiever who's always been told that she's a little too mouthy, too in your face, just too much. Her academic nemesis is a boy named Ian June, who Kavya finds out is her new coworker at her summer job where she performs as a princess for children's birthday parties. So they're forced to spend time together and they're constantly complaining about each other to their friends because of it. So their friends come up with this ingenious plan to end their rivalry once and for all by forcing them to take part in a series of challenges throughout the summer until one of them finally wins. Not only is this a super fun summer romance, but it's also a really great coming-of-age story. Kind of like To Shape a Dragon's Breath, Kavya is another character who is incredibly strong, decisive, driven, talented, and fearless in the pursuit of her own greatness. She knows who she is, what she wants, what she's worth, and she refuses to diminish herself just because her over-the-top personality might be inconvenient for other people who want her to be less. I think we need more stories and more romances like this for young people especially, which shows how young characters can fearlessly and shamelessly embrace all the different sides of themselves while still growing into the person they were meant to be. Lastly, I want to recommend a book that recently came out, that is It's All or Nothing Vale by Andrea Beatriz Arango. This is a brand new queer middle grade story written in verse. It's about a young Puerto Rican American fencer named Valentina who was the top athlete at her fencing gym before she was injured in a vehicular accident. After months of being away from the sport, Vale is finally cleared to fence again, but she quickly finds that it doesn't come as easily as it did before. And to make things worse, there's a cute new girl at her gym named Mirka who seems to have taken her place. I have read and loved all of Andrea's middle grade books, and this was no exception. It is a truly incredible story that gives Vale space to be angry, frustrated, and hurt as she struggles to reckon with how her body has changed. That's really the journey she's taking in this story, unpacking her own internalized ableism and understanding of disability, and also really learning how to give herself grace instead of giving into the temptation to feel badly about herself when she compares herself to other fencers. I think this story is a resounding ode to self-love because it's all about discovering forms of validation and joy that are internal rather than external, and it's about realizing that we can't stake our self-worth and our entire identity in only one thing. People contain multitudes, and the more of those multitudes we allow ourselves to discover, the bigger and more beautiful our world becomes. This is fantastic. I highly recommend it, and I definitely recommend the audiobook if you can access it because it's read by the one and only Puerto Rican legend, Vico Ortiz. So those are a few of my favorite love stories that celebrate all different kinds of love. Like I said, there are so many more titles that could fit into each of these categories, so if any come to mind for you, please feel free to drop them down below in the comments. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, educate yourself, be kind to yourself, take care of yourself and others, and I will catch you on the flip side of the page.